Once again, live from Washington, moderator Gwen Ifill.
Good evening. This week's primary elections provided us with the best chance yet to assess how the political turmoil around the nation is turning into a force that could alter not only the makeup of Congress, but also shake up the debates over immigration, Wall Street reform, health care, and even the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We started in Pennsylvania, where voters appear to send contradictory messages, electing an insider Democrat from one end of the state to a seat in Congress and sending another insider who hails from the other end of the state home. The insider who lost was, of course, brand new Democrat and five-term Senator Arlen Specter, who was targeted in the closing days of the campaign by perhaps one of the most effective political ads ever.
My change in party will enable me to be re-elected.
For 45 years, Arlen Specter has been a Republican politician.
Arlen Specter is the right man for the United States Senate. I can count on this man. See, that's important. He's a firm ally.
But now,
my change in party will enable me to be re-elected.
Arlen Specter switched parties to save one job. His, not yours.
The man who beat Specter is Joe Sestak, who just 3 years ago won his House seat by taking out another Washington fixture, Republican Curt Weldon. So has Sestak been riding a wave here, Dan, that even we didn't see, perhaps?
Well, I think we saw that there was a wave out there, but I think it took new force on Tuesday. This is a wave that is described in lots of different ways, anti-incumbent, anti-Washington, but this was certainly one in which anti-insider took full force on Tuesday, and I think that incumbents in both parties recognize the strength of that at this point.
Was Arlen Specter, John, just basically in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Yeah, I mean, Arlen Specter in some ways, it doesn't tell us a whole lot because he spent 45 years training Democrats to not like him, to vote against him, and then he switched parties and then asked those same Democrats to vote for him. And what was so punishing about that ad was not just the idea that he had switched for his own opportunism, but
which was bad.
Which is bad. Wrong thing to do in this year. I mean, that right off the bat, that would be enough. But the voice of George Bush in a Democratic primary is just, you know, nails on a blackboard for Democratic voters. And so the Specter race was, you know, and he was trounced 8 points.
Didn't they see it coming, Susan?
I think he saw it coming at the end. He looked pretty unhappy. But you know, one of the things that I think that we've seen starting with the Scott Brown election in Massachusetts earlier this year is that voters really seem to be seeking some sort of authenticity. And, you know, running as a Republican for 5 terms and then suddenly asking all these Democrats who've been voting against you for 30 years to vote for you, it doesn't exactly cash in on the authenticity checkpoint.
Right, unless you're authentically self-interested.
Yeah.
Well, these are politicians. We're all authentically self-interested. We're just not all asking someone else for help. So the White House in the last few days kind of didn't show up after having clapped Arlen Specter on the back, welcomed him to the party, and kind of found a way not to campaign for him in the end.
They did, and the White House saw this coming. I mean, they knew within the last about 2 weeks or so, I'm told by senior advisors, that they thought that he was falling around the same time that ad started showing. And they also became more comfortable with Joe Sestak, that he could be perhaps a stronger Democratic nominee and things. But I think the White House has perhaps learned at least one lesson from a lot of rounds of campaigning. He went to Massachusetts at the end and campaigned for Martha Coakley. She lost. There are 2 other examples in gubernatorial elections last year. So I think what we saw with this was, you know, the White House said, well, he was on the phone, he did a TV ad for him, Joe Biden went up there 5 times, but he did not go up there on the Sunday before the election, put his arm around Senator Specter and try and turn out the vote. And probably wouldn't have helped.
Probably wouldn't have helped.
But it was interesting that he decided not to do that.
We have a lot of races to talk about, but before we leave this one, I want to talk about what happens next in that race, because Pat Toomey, who is a conservative who ran against, in fact, he's the reason Arlen Specter switched parties, because he imagined that he was going to be a real challenge for him in the primary. So what does this look like for Joe Sestak? Is he at a disadvantage?
Well, he's in the polls right now, he's down by a tiny bit, but some people would argue that beating Arlen Specter, surviving this race, running that very powerful ad that got a lot of play, not just on the air, but all of us running it, improved Sestak's standing. One of the reasons Obama wanted to stay out, too, is that the people who are supporting Sestak, they need to come out again in this general election to beat Toomey. And also people who are not, you know, who are longtime Democrats across the country don't want to see the president weighing in against somebody like Sestak on behalf of a turncoat like Arlen Specter. And so Sestak might, he has some support. The White House is very bullish on him now. And so, they have to be. After, by the way, we should mention, of course, after trying to get him out of the race in the first place, and there's some uncertainty about what the White House did, but they definitely tried to get him not to run, and now they're best friends with him.
At the other end of the state, the White House and Democrats in general are very happy about what happened in a congressional race outside of Pittsburgh. John